Epstein's so-called birthday book has long drawn attention for the famous names it contained, but the darker, esoteric fragments pressed into its margins are more revealing. Tucked among signatures and dedications is a tiny item we'll examine today. Listed as a personal in a private high school zine Epstein produced and stamped, "Absolutely no distribution," the line reads, "Three guys sitting in a boat, Eatum, Beatum, and Cheatum." Eatum says to Beatum, followed by a string of 12 dots and 12 question marks. That provenance matters. The warning, the private circulation, and the fact that Epstein chose to keep the fragment decades later all point away from casual adolescent whimsy and toward a deliberately private signal, an in-group mnemonic or code more useful to insiders than to anyone outside the circle. Read first as surface humor, the line looks like mock Latin nonsense. Read in context, it performs a shift. The opening image, three men in a boat, gives the fragment its operating frame. A boat is a small sealed space. It isolates, it concentrates bodies and agency, and it limits exit and oversight. Metaphorically, it names any environment engineered to reduce outside scrutiny and increase dependence. Those private rooms, secluded trips, and cramped social situations in which a host can control who is present and what becomes visible. The boat is not merely background, it is an instrument. Containment is technique. It makes the rest of the instructions possible. Once you accept the boat as setting, the three subsequent units stop functioning as names and begin to resolve as verbs. The mock Latin endings disguise ordinary imperatives: Eatum, Beatum, Cheatum. That phonetic sleight of hand is the first operational move. Hide instruction in the form of a joke. Read as actions, the sequence becomes a simple, causal script. Eatum, eat them, is the lure phase, gifting, flattering, offering access, pleasure, or status that creates an opening and makes the target receptive. Beatum, beat them, is the pressure phase. Escalation through urgency, social leverage, shaming, or intimidation that pushes a compliant or ambivalent person across a line. Cheatum, cheat them, is the extraction phase. Taking money, information, sexual access, or other value the victim is made to surrender. The three form a contiguous causal pathway. The grooming enables the coercion enables the theft or abuse, and the payoff makes the system repeatable. That mapping already exposes an important psychological and tactical logic. Grooming is not incidental niceness, it is calibrated social engineering. It has rhythm and purpose, small, repeated benefits knit dependence. Social attention reframes inequality as intimacy. Exclusive access converts gratitude into obligation. Pressure is not simple brute force but applied leverage, timed, personalized, and often framed as consequence or opportunity lost. Extraction is not only the physical taking but the closing of a circuit that converts relational indebtedness into tangible advantage. In a contained space, the kinetic economy of this sequence runs faster and with fewer checks, fewer witnesses, fewer escape routes, and more controlled narratives. The second sentence reads, Eatum says to Beatum, which is followed by a string of 12 dots and 12 question marks. This precision is not stylistic decoration, but structural instruction, converting what appears to be punctuation into a numerical code, Epstein's specialty. The deliberate symmetry, 12 and 12, signals control, measurement, and duality. A two-part process rendered in counted beats. This is the fragment's instruction for a critical contingency. Eatum says to Beatum denotes a specific signal point. The moment when the subject, having been drawn through reward and pressure, begins to question the methods by which their desires are being satisfied. It marks the transition from smooth manipulation to the onset of doubt. What follows is not merely elliptical punctuation, but a coded two-step evasion protocol. The 12 dots signify delay, the deliberate stretching of time to break the momentum of suspicion. At this stage, Beatum, the function of enforcement, intervenes not through confrontation, but through management of tempo. The pause disorients by withholding closure. It introduces stillness where the accuser expects movement, forcing them to fill the silence with their own speculation. That interval becomes a psychological buffer in which doubt begins to reassert control. Delay buys distance and weakens conviction. The 12 question marks that follow are not literal questions, but representations of proliferating uncertainty. They indicate that the manipulator's task is no longer to answer, but to seed the conditions under which the target begins questioning themselves. Beatum's pause hands the weight of the moment to Cheatum, whose silence completes the inversion. Instead of the operator being interrogated, the subject becomes self-interrogating. The confusion works from the inside out. It multiplies the number of questions in the mark's own mind until conviction dissipates into paralysis. The phrase therefore encodes a dual motion. First, suspend the exchange to cool it, then allow uncertainty to consume the challenger from within. Combined, the pause and the barrage form a deliberate evasive choreography. First stall, then scramble perception. The exact 12-12 structure also functions as a clock for that choreography. 12 beats of stillness to let outrage cool, followed by 12 beats of noise to drown coherence. The even numbers mirror the two roles implied in the line, Eatum initiating the pause, Beatum executing the confusion, turning typography into a miniature score of coordinated deception. In that sense, the symmetry is not aesthetic but operational. It encodes both timing and division of labor, transforming evasion from improvisation into a rehearsed and repeatable routine. Together, these short lines encode three interlocking concepts: containment, then co-option, lure, pressure, extract, and then confusion, handoff, delay, distract. Containment establishes the physical and psychological boundary in which control can be exercised without interference. Co-option describes the operational sequence by which the target's agency is absorbed and redirected, and confusion provides the maintenance protocol that preserves the structure once doubt intrudes. The genius of the fragment lies in its compression. It fuses environmental design, behavioral manipulation, and defensive strategy into a single mnemonic loop. The boat supplies the isolation that makes the lure effective. The lure leads seamlessly into pressure and extraction, and when exposure threatens, the mechanism folds inward, substituting silence and ambiguity for denial, until uncertainty corrodes resistance. The humor of mock Latin disguises the precision of the underlying logic. What seems an adolescent joke resolves, under close reading, into a complete operational grammar of exploitation. How to build the setting, enact the sequence, and preserve the illusion that nothing has happened at all. The implications of that compression are practical and disturbing. For investigators and forensic analysts, small artifacts from private archives can be instructive not only for their content, but for what their preservation reveals about insider priorities. A preserved mnemonic suggests not embarrassment, but pride or utility. The fragment's survival signals that its author regarded it as worth saving. For psychologists and social scientists, the line is a compact lesson in social engineering. It shows the architecture of grooming translated into tactics: reward to create openness, calibrated pressure to convert openness into obedience, extraction to close the operation, and linguistic and temporal techniques to sustain it under scrutiny. For institutions and potential targets, the fragment underscores that context is weaponized. Control of space and information are prerequisites for these dynamics. Countermeasures, therefore, must address environment as well as behavior. Insistence on transparency, documentation, third-party presence, and readily available exit or escalation options undermines containment. Education and early detection break the causal chain before pressure and extraction take hold. Immediate insistence on clarity and evidence defangs the confusion protocol. There are also historical and interpretive consequences. An adolescent in-group joke that migrates into a later personal archive can mark continuity rather than accident. When a tactical formulation survives from teenage zine to adult possession, the preservation invites a reading of development. An idea born as private banter may have been rehearsed, refined, and normalized inside a social formation. That continuity matters when later patterns of conduct echo the compressed script. The fragment becomes a small but telling link between youthful code and adult practice. Finally, the rhetorical form of the fragment matters. Humor and mock erudition do two jobs at once. They make instructions memorable to those inside the group, and they offer plausible deniability to outsiders. Eatum, Beatum, Cheatum sounds like a joke in a magazine. Read by the initiated, it functions like a checklist. That duality, memorability plus deniability, is itself an operational advantage. It lets a community transmit technique while shielding itself from ordinary scrutiny. Seen in this light, the tiny zine line is not a throwaway pun, but a skeletal manual. It maps a space, prescribes a sequence, and codifies a contingency for exposure. It uses the play of language to hide the machinery of control. Recognizing that machinery in miniature sharpens our vision for how it operates at scale and suggests where to break it. Dismantle the boat, refuse the leverage, protect the target, lift the fog, and stop the grooming.